we had the live stream events we did from the studio in Seattle, we would also simulcast them, so we'd have 2 streams in case something happened.
Right. Like, especially if just people can't get in or whatever, it's, something dumb's happening.
Yeah, and especially these were paid events too, so it's like,
oh yeah. Oh, I got you. Yeah.
All right, and I will start the webinar right now, and we'll let the attendees come in.
All right. Welcome, everyone. We're going to give it the usual minute or two as people are still joining. I'm seeing attendees filter in. It seems to take a minute or two here on Zoom, so we will get started in a couple minutes, but stay tight. Say hi to everyone in chat. I'll say this again later, but if you have actual questions during the presentation, we're going to use the Q&A feature of Zoom. So at the bottom of your window there, you should see Q&A. So if you have actual questions, go ahead and submit them there as we go through, and we'll kind of triage as we go through the presentation. So again, we'll get started for real in a couple minutes. You know, Johan, I just realized that somebody made a good point. It's April 1st. We should be doing something. Maybe you are. Am I ruining a joke here?
No, sir. We're good. We're good.
Man, clearly we screwed this up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Were you talking about cloud imaging? No, we're talking about imaging from a thumb drive or something.
I don't know, floppy.
Yeah, from a floppy.
That's how we do it.
There you go. At some point, you're like, "Here, I'm going to share my screen," and what you just pan over to like 10 floppy drives running in parallel.
Yeah.
I created this for performance. You can make an array. You make an RAID array of your floppy disks.
Of course. That's how you do it. So,
It's just 2 hours of us watching Johan flip to the next disk. I'm like, pick it up. Next.
read arrow number 11,247. Yep.
Oh man, totally missed opportunity. I miss ThinkGeek. I miss ThinkGeek.
Yeah, I
remember
remember the
those?
old saying, who is general failure and then why is he reading my disk? Classics.
Oh, that's good.
All right.
Yeah, let's all right. Okay, so welcome. People are still joining. For those who have joined, thank you. We're happy you're here. My name's Brian Dam, and yeah, let's go to the next slide. Just go right into it. My name is Brian Dam. I'm sort of going to do light moderation here. My role is just to introduce the man, the myth, the legend, Johan Arwidmark. And my only job here is to sort of moderate some of the questions. So what the high level, not the agenda per se, but we're going to give, Johan's going to spend 30, 40, 50 minutes going through some content. If you have questions, go ahead and go down to the bottom of the screen. There's a QA. There's a QA section. Ask your questions there. That's going to help me. There's several hundred people going to be in this presentation, and so I can't really keep track of all the chat. And so ask in the QA. What will happen is I'll triage those questions. If there's a really good one that pertains to what Johan's asking or presenting at that right moment, we'll interrupt or give him a chance to catch up and ask some questions. But then at the end, when he's sort of done the main presentation, we'll go into a QA part of it, and we'll stay here as long as Johan and I and you guys can stay around. I know he has some stuff later on this morning, so he can't stay forever, but we will absolutely stay here as long as we all can and answer as many questions as possible. So the best way to do that, to get your question answered, is to sort of ask early and ask it in the Q&A session instead of the chat. So with that, I will hand it over to Johan. Take it away.
Thank you, Brian. Excellent. And thank you, Emma, Chelsea, and all the other people at Recast for having me. These webinars has been phenomenally well received. It's great to see that you guys are doing that and supporting the community this way. So hats off to you guys. Well done. My name is Johan. I'll be host for the next 45 minutes-ish, plus the Q&A time, as Brian said. And I've been a deployment geek for basically all my adult life. I started off when I was about 16 years old. After high school, I went down to a local computer shop and we assembled computers and we sold them or built them and sold them. And they had to be deployed. And back then, it really was floppies. We talked about earlier. It was copying 1 or 2 floppies done. That was deployment back then. Has evolved slightly a bit. And I kind of never left that. I've been doing it since, and that was about 30-some years ago. So I may not have seen everything, but I've seen a lot. So again, if you guys do have questions related to anything, ConfigMgr, imaging, you name it, I'll be happy to answer those. The sort of line of argument or topic for today, though, is cloud imaging. And this is something that has evolved heavily, obviously, because of recent COVID pandemic and the change in how we do networking these days, where content comes from, and that just accelerated that process heavily. And to this day, I'm still so humbled and impressed how network folks and security teams and management came together, and things that was just impossible to do like a year ago, somehow they found a way and did it. Sometimes the need is like the how is the American saying, English saying, like the mother of necessities or something like that. We have a saying like that back home in Sweden. But anyhow, has been evolving rapidly. And this kind of leads a little bit to the topic that I want to talk to you about today, and share some information on what has been happening the last few years in this particular area, where the need is to deploy machines everywhere from wherever they are in the world. And the last 2 years, I've stumbled across a few scenarios that are kind of related to this. So in addition to doing community presentations and things like that, my main role is I'm a technical fellow with 2 Point Software, and we develop software to help monitor and visualize and control everything that is going on the network side. But also we have been developing a lot of technologies related to deploy machines over internet. And when I started to look at the scenarios that we've been working with, it's been simple things, that being able to re-image a machine that somebody is actually working from home with, or a service machine when someone is working at home, because as you guys know, Windows 10 kind of have to be updated at least every once in a while. You can't really stay behind too far or too long time before it's going to yell at you and say, hey, it's time. But we've also been helping organizations that has been victims for ransomware attacks, where their entire infrastructure is more or less either gone or encrypted, which is kind of gone as well. And they have nothing to deploy from, and they need to build a new infrastructure, and they need to be built from a source that they kind of trust. So we have been spinning out deployment solutions in Azure, on Amazon for that matter as well, just to be able to support the scenario where what happens if you don't have an infrastructure. You still need to be able to deploy new servers so you can build a new infrastructure. You still need to be able to deploy new clients because you don't have any. Also worked with construction company, manufacturing companies, where they spin up either new construction sites or new plants. And the very first people that come on site, well, they need to have something going before they can, connect up and get maybe a VPN connection up to the main office and whatever. So there is also need to be able to deploy a machine very quickly for those type of scenarios. Of course, you usually want to manage the machines after they've been imaged, and that's where Intune or ConfigMgr or both comes in. There is also a need to reset and refresh devices if something goes bad and a machine starts to misbehave, or you're a little bit too enthusiastic when you're playing around with your Intune security hardening policies, and you kind of lock the machine in such a way. Yes, I've done that, so that the user cannot log in anymore, and you need to fix that real quick. And yeah, that's doable as well. So the 4 sort of main pillars to this is obviously to have some sort of infrastructure in the cloud that you can connect to, because the scenario here is we don't have anything locally anymore. We just have what's available in the cloud. Then we need to somehow kick off the imaging process, because even in 2021, a computer doesn't really just know to go ahead and start to download an image and applications and updates unless you tell it from where and how to connect to that source of content. Then it's of course about the transferring content and trying to do that in a as effective way as possible without spending too many dollars on paying for download costs, etc. And then it's all about also monitoring that process to see what's going on. So let's jump into the first pillar straight away, the infrastructure. And this is usually what we've been playing with for the last 2-3 years. Either you can spin up a VM in Azure and Amazon, and you install MDT on that. That's the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit. And you extend it with some Powershell scripts that me and a good friend, Michael Nystrom, and a few others has been poking around with for the last year or so, or 2 years. Call it PowerShell deployment, but it's just an extension to the toolkit. And what it enables you to do is to do deployment over HTTPS instead of the whack, UNC, SMB type traffic that MDT normally only supports. Then, of course, for those of you that are working with ConfigMgr, you probably have seen that starting in 2006 of ConfigMgr, you actually have the ability to do bare metal deployment imaging directly through or to via the Cloud Management Gateway. That one is obviously available in Azure only. It's an Azure, it's a Microsoft service that you subscribe to or pay for, but you can still do it. And the benefit of that is obviously you're using the same packages, the same sequences, the same images and boot images and whatnot that you already have in ConfigMgr that you've probably been tested for years on your on-premise environment, and now you can just extend that and run it from the CMG. Intune, of course, is for the management side of things, but if you're a little bit clever, you can actually do some OSD from Intune. Over the years, I have been developing offline medias based out of MDT that I've been uploading to Intune as an Azure blob, and through a script, PowerShell in Intune, I've been able to kick off that media. So that's also an option as well. I added this one in here, even though to me, autopilot is not really deployment, but it kind of ties into the process, because something that is very, very useful if you do deploy a machine from scratch out there in the wild and in an office, there is no connection back to the corporate headquarters or whatever. It's kind of nice to be able to manage that machines as soon as it gets done. And autopilot to me is just a nice name, fancy name to get a machine enrolled into Intune. And of course, once it gets enrolled into Intune, you can also have Intune deploy the ConfigMgr agent, and suddenly you see that machine popping up in the ConfigMgr console. So basically, you went from having nothing, started the box, it deployed, and half an hour later, you can see it in the either Intune console or ConfigMgr console or both, depending on your setup. And then, of course, we have the automation framework around this. Microsoft Graph allows you to PowerShell, do all of this and more, especially around the Intune scenario, because the Intune GUI is still, Intune has been around for 10 years, don't get me wrong, but there are still things that I often find that I need to do in Intune that is simply missing from the GUI, and I simply resort to do that in PowerShell instead until Microsoft add that particular feature into the interface, the web interface. And of course, all types of automation is useful for this scenario too. Then it's all about starting the actual deployment, and this is where it becomes interesting, I think. Somehow we need to get going. And we have these 5 different methods that we can get started with. So first of all, it's easiest to do it with wired connections these days. It's not the only option, but that's usually the easiest one. And the traditional way of doing this is simply to have a boot media, Windows PE, either MDT or ConfigMgr or whatever deployment solution you're using. Just need to support cloud imaging. You put that on a USB stick and you boot up the machine from a USB stick. You select something and then you go, and the machine will image itself. Now, there have been some clever community work around getting Wi-Fi into Windows PE. I see David Segura has been working some with that. I know Oliver Kieselbach has done it. I know Brooks Pepin with VMware has done it. A lot of creativity, because WinP, as you know, by default doesn't have wireless support, but it can be added. It's not supported, but as I see it, when it comes to boot images, either the boot image downloads or it doesn't. How it gets downloaded, I couldn't care less, because once WinP loads, it doesn't really bother too much on what system or how it was loaded. It just cares that it's running. And once WinP is loaded, yeah, that's when we connect to our VMs in Azure or our CMG or whatever and do deployments that way. Shinier hardware also supports the boot directly from BIOS. So modern firmware, UEFI, and the only hardware I have been testing this personally on is the HP hardware. They were nice enough to send me a machine to test with. So I've been using that Firefly G7, which is a workstation class machine. But that is one of their sort of business models that they target for businesses, and that one actually has the capability with the right setup to boot WinP directly from BIOS, either stage into a separate flash disk or download it on the fly from a server on internet into that flash and then boot from it. So that then you don't need a USB stick at all. Our little company has also been very successful lately, and we're going to post that in just a few weeks, but we've been able to deploy through phones as well. So you take your iPhone or Android, you hook it up to your laptop, and you boot from it. That's USB stick involved as well with some code, but you're actually using the phone as a network card in WinP. So it's like tethering with style, so to speak. And then, of course, our company also sells an iPixie Anywhere platform that allows you to do Pixie boot over internet. Now, this entire platform that we develop and sell is indeed open source, and we contribute all our code changes back to the iPixie open source project as well. We just kind of hope that you want to get it from us and get our support and our know-how on how to use it, but it's actually is an open source project. Now, where shall we start?
Quick question
Demo.
for you there, Johan.
Yeah.
Somebody was asking specific. Do you know if all the HP EliteBooks G7 have that ability?
No, they don't. There's only a fairly long list though that supports it. I haven't seen an EliteBook that doesn't have it yet, but HP does maintain a list of all their supported models that have this. Basically, if you find a eMMC flash disk on the device, it's very likely to have it. The feature in HP that enables this is called Sure Recover. So if you read up on your model and see if they have support for HP Sure Recover, then they have this capability. But all right, let's get going. Or did you have another question for me?
Yeah, it's kind of tangentially related to this one. Somebody's asking if was there a change between ConfigMgr 2006 and 2010 in terms of the cloud booting or CMG booting? They're asking like.
Oh yeah, yes it was. Let me show you real quick, get rid of that one, thank you. So I actually wrote, I'm happy that you asked. It's almost like it was staged, but it actually wasn't. But I wrote a blog post a while back around how to do cloud bare metal deployment through ConfigMgr, where I explained the differences in between 2006 and 2010. And when it all comes down to back in 2006, even though you did everything over internet in terms of content, you still need to find a local MP management point first. That's it to tell you, no, you're not supposed to use me, you're supposed to use this one over here. We're kind of like, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. I don't have one. I can't talk to one. I don't have a connection. But in 2010 they fixed that. So when you create boot images now in ConfigMgr 2010, you actually have the option to specify a management point that is your cloud management gateway. So that basically gets injected into the boot media. So
okay, cool.
That solved that problem. So yes, go up to 2010
Awesome.
or 2103, whenever that gets released. Should be real short or soon. I was hoping this Friday, but we'll see. We'll see. Could be one of those happy Fridays.
Close.
Yeah,
it's almost ready.
Yeah.
Okay, that's
Dang,
it.
it's
Thanks.
tomorrow. Yeah.
Cross your fingers.
All right. So what I have here is obviously a lab environment with a bunch of things, but I have an MDT environment on which I have created a bunch of sequences, but I have also extended this with the PowerShell deployment toolkit. And the extension is not terribly complicated to do. You download from GitHub, and I can show you the link right away. It's called Friends of MDT. So this is where we have the repository. You might recognize some of the folks that has been working on it, Nia, Steve Campbell, Nystrom, Andreas, and a few others. But this is where you download the stuff, open source, of course. And then you simply go to wherever folder you downloaded it to, put the stable version here, you run the install script, and it now replaces all the 100-some VB scripts that MDT normally comes with instead of with PowerShell. So basically, we also created new sequence templates. So when you look in a sequence and poke around, you will see it's much shorter than it usually is. And these sequences are normally fairly long. And what we do in the background is that every time you select something to add to a sequence that would normally be a hard-coded VB script that the sequence will reference to, we kind of intercept that call and say, no, you should use this PowerShell script instead. So I can show you how one of those looks actually. It's, let's see where I put that one here. Yeah, so here are some good examples on that one. Basically, the sequence want to use this script, and we say, no, you do not. You want to use this script instead, thank you. And we just repeat that process for all the actions that are available. So that is fun and games. So then I can take a virtual machine that I have and go to a clean snapshot of it, wait patiently. I usually brag about my lab server, but sometimes things just takes a little bit extra time. So I'm booting from, in this case, from an ISO, and I'm going to show you how this way to boot as well. But I just wanted to see the concept. So shortly, it will load WinPE, and sometimes the Hyper-V console is a little bit slow, but it's coming. So this is just the regular WinPE boot image. We just changed the background, adjusted the screen resolution a little bit to be a 69 screen resolution. Good old MDT still does its 1024 by 768, which is fantastic for all the people having those VGA monitors still around, 14-inch. But for those been buying new monitors for the last 15 years, they have a different layout on their monitor. But bottom line, you do some validations here, and what we're seeing in the background that is changing is actually we are rotating background information on top of the background in WinPE. And you can do this with ConfigMgr as well. We have a lot of customers having their own little customizations to see what's going on in the background. You might have seen the TS background project from the OneWin folks, for example. But here we are connected, and as you can see, we are connected through HTTPS. So we have a certificate in the boot image, and we also actually need to provide username and password on top of that certificate just for security reasons. And then I will simply pick a sequence, and I will kick off a deployment, and it will do that. So that's one way of starting it. A more fun way of starting the same process, and I'm going to see if I can do some juggling here, but I'm going to try to change the screen share to a different window. So this is where it's going to be fun. Right, can you guys see this? Can you see this, Brian? The
Yep,
major world capture card. Yeah. So this is a laptop. Good. So this is an HP laptop I have next to me while just watching the screen. So I'm just going to go over and pick a different mouse and keyboard and reboot this one. It's going to disconnect from the capture card momentarily, but what I'm going to do while it's rebooting is that I'm going to hammer F11 as hard as I can, many times to not miss it. So I'm going to restart this box. And as soon as it does that, I will press F11. And it's going to take about 20-30 seconds to get this one up on the screen. There is a little bit of boot delay to it. And right now I'm flying blind, so
why has nobody like created like a little robotic finger that just sits there and pushes a keyboard? It seems like you could sell that to a lot of OSD geeks.
All right, so here you can see entering recovery factory, and that's instead of pressing F12 to do a network boot, I pressed F11, which is how you get into the HP Sure recovery mode. So that one will boot shortly, and you will basically see a BIOS-based screen in just a little bit. I was hoping. Demo gods persist. Here we go, entering startup delay. Should be coming into setup soon. Always takes long when you actually wait for something. Here we go, fantastic. So this is the HP Sure Recover. And now I have two options. Either I select to restore from network, and this is where I previously haven't staged anything at all on the box. Or when I know that we actually changed the boot image on the server to something else, updated it, added more drivers, whatnot. But if I already have downloaded boot image once, it's actually being cached in that local flash disk. And the cool thing about this local flash disk is that you cannot see it from Windows. You can only see it when you go in here. So after I boot WinPE starting up from the BIOS, I will actually have two hard drives. But if I boot in WinPE normally, like from a Pixie or USB stick, whatever, I will only see one. So this one is hidden and it's only unlocked when I actually go through this particular environment. So I'm going to launch this little bootwin, and this one will just do exactly what my previous demo did. It's just that I'm initiating entire process from within BIOS. And I'm also no longer connecting to an HTTPS server that I have locally. I'm actually connecting to one of our servers, lab servers that we have up in Azure. So hopefully we should see this one kicking in shortly, boot from WinPE, and basically give you a kind of similar experience to what I've showed you in the virtual machine. The scaling of the capture card makes it look a little bit different, but you should be able to see it okay nonetheless. So there's just a different way to get booting going, which I think is quite fun. But other than that, this one is just going to do the same thing, going through the various hoops here. You can see the 32 gigs of RAM, D7 mobile workstation, yada yada, using a Realtek adapter network card that I have plugged into it, and a few other network cards as well, because you cannot have too few network cards. You need at least 3 in any given laptop, I think. Useful for Hyper-V testing also. But yeah, this is just going to do the exact same thing, just a different way of booting it. So I'm going to stop the screen sharing of this guy, and I'm going to reboot it back into Windows, and I'm going to show you how I put that boot image into the BIOS, because I think that's pretty cool. See if I can get back the original screen. Here we go. All right, and now I actually need to reboot the laptop so I can come up in Windows and actually show you what's going on. Just a second. It's always fun when we do a lot of live demos that have hardware involved in it also.
And work over the internet. What could go wrong? Like losing all your power or something?
Don't get me started on that one. Good day. Just last week, or this week sucked. Last week also sucked. We live on the countryside. We live in a village. It's about 1,000 people. And I have total 5 of the UPSs at home, but even that somehow doesn't do the trick for us. Anyhow, I was in the middle of a presentation and boom, sure enough, internet went out. So anyhow, while I'm waiting for that little friend to boot, I can actually show you here. I saved a little copy of my environment. So the nice thing about the HP Sure Recover is that it actually comes with a complete development framework. So you can customize it to your heart's content. I've been told that Lenovo has a similar platform, Cloud something they call it, but I haven't tested it myself. I have no idea if Dell has this. I haven't seen that either, but HP I know has it. And this is not really an HP feature per se. This is part of UEFI. It's just that vendors have to actually implement support for it in their platforms. But basically, a few links here. Can give you through like, okay, how does this work? What happens in the background? How do you provision things, etc. But it sure looks like my HP laptop booted up. So I'm going to connect to it. And I'm getting all sorts of friendly advices in the chat when I should get a complete generator system for my house. And yeah, fireproof. That would be nice. Anyhow, Powershell coming up. So HP has PowerShell modules for their BIOS. For example, if I import that particular module, and I can ask the system, are you provisioned, are you not provisioned? So if it's not provisioned, that's something you have to do first to get control over the BIOS, because by default, HP come with their stuff in their environment. But this one should show me fairly shortly what I'm up against. I know you just booted, but come on. Usually this command is fairly instant. Not sure why it's giving me a hard time right now, but that's another story. So while waiting for the output of that one, what you have to do is to generate up a bunch of certificates so that you can provide your own payloads to the BIOS. And once you have that set up, then you can go ahead and actually do some things with it. So you apply the payload, you reboot the box, and then it's yours. Then you can control it from either Powershell or through ConfigMgr. HP also offers a ConfigMgr platform to apply payloads to the BIOS. But for example, down here, here's a payload that I put in. So I actually added in a boot URL into the BIOS as a payload. I also prepared down here a boot image. So I have a boot image folder, this one here, on which I simply have an MDT boot image, or it can be any WinPE, but in this case it's a MDT boot image. But in order for HP to accept it, I actually have to enumerate through all the boot files, and I have to sign it with a key, create a manifest that making sure that these have not been tampered with, because again, internet and cloud imaging, we want to make sure that the stuff that we download is things that we have actually approved. So if I run through, let's see, these things here, and this little snippet here, this took a while of bad way to figure out eventually. I should probably write a blog post about this also. But what I did just now is I generated a manifest file which just contains the signature and the particular boot file and the size of that boot file. And this all have to match for the HP computer to accept these files when booting from the internet. So that was all that was done on the server side. To prepare the machines, and of course you can PowerShell, you can just push it out as well as you like. Another neat little trick is the ITC project that I mentioned that we are developing and working with, or 2Point Software is developing and working with. And here I have another network that I have prepared. Has a few machines running, but there is no infrastructure on this network. The only thing that is on this network right now, let's see if I can connect to my little fancy router. Yeah, that's okay. What password did I put in here? Apparently not that password.
Capital P @ SSW0.
Dang it. Wonder what this one was. It's not the end of the world. I just wanted to show you the DHCP scope options. Need to figure out that one later. But the only thing that is here is an EdgeMax router. And in this EdgeMax router, I have configured DHCP scope options. Give it one more try, then I'm gonna give up. It was password 1 with an exclamation mark in the end there, so you're good. Anyhow, in the configuration for this Edge router, we look at services. So this is what I have. I have configured next server, which is basically IP helper, but in scope options. And now I can take one of my clients here and go to clean snapshot. And as long as that Pixie server in Azure is up and running, which it was this morning, so I'm hoping it still is. Otherwise, I will yell at Andreas later. But I'm not trying to Pixie boot over internet using nothing but scope options in my router. So no service, no referrals, no nothing on this particular network. Good so far. Here we go. Connected to Cloud Boot, which is in Azure. And what we added here before the boot image downloads is a login. So this is an NTLM authentication. So in order to even start to download the boot image, I will have to authenticate to our server. Let's see. Hopefully I tapped that right this time. Sure enough. So it's now downloading the boot image. And the cool thing about this is now it's getting the entire boot image from our VM in Azure. So it's going to take a few minutes to get it down. But if there are any local friends that already have the boot image downloaded to them, we have also integrated branch cache. So we will do peer-to-peer. So the boot image will come down like right away from a local friend rather than over internet. And this is something we do obviously to save some costs and time when deploying from Azure, because you have to pay for every single download. And we do the same thing for every single package that comes through MBT as well. So on our little website, well, not so little, but on our website, we have a free toolkit that you can download. And this one enables branch cache in WinPE to get with bits. So it allows you to do peer-to-peer or content through the entire WinPE phase. Something that WinPE normally doesn't support, but branch cache is a Windows component. It can be added to the boot image, and life is good. So that's another option to get content down faster. Finally, to that, I would like to say we also figured out a way to connect the phone hooked up to a computer through a Lightning or USB cable together with the iPixie running on a USB stick. And if you look closer to the phone, it's basically USB tethering. And when downloading or coming up into WinPE, the phone is actually a network card in WinPE. And then we can do deployment with pretty dang good speeds directly through the phone through 5G. And it takes about 20 minutes to deploy a machine this way. So basically, as long as you have a laptop and you have a phone and the cable, you can actually re-image that machine bare metal from having nothing, which I think is very cool. Then, of course, in my environment, I also have a few cloud management gateways up and running. I have one in technical preview. I have one in a regular current branch. So let me see if that server is up and running. If not, I'm going to start it. Yeah, I did start it before. Good. Surprises you, Brian, but it actually happens that I prepare things before presentations. It's rare, but I do it.
Now, this one's a bit of a cheat. You've done this before, but I'll allow it. I'll allow it this one time.
Yeah. Any questions, by the way, while I have your attention?
There's a few. I don't know that. I don't know any that makes sense to ask now versus in the Q&A. I have one of my own, but I think that too belongs more in the Q&A than here.
All right, we'll simply scoot them over to the Q&A portion, which will happen shortly anyway. So
yeah.
Anyway, here is a regular ConfigMgr current branch 2010. I applied in March rollup because you kind of need to make it happy in life. Basically, if you are on ConfigMgr 2010, make sure to apply that one, and then life will be better. But anyway, I have a CMD set up in this environment here, and I have all my sequences and packages published to it. And this means I also have a gazillion of sequences, well, a few, as you do, that I'm using for various types of deployments. And what I can do, of course, is Microsoft doesn't have a pixel server that works on the CMD, at least not yet. So we're just using the iPixel one when we need to. But you can at least generate the boot media. And when you generate the boot media, either a USB stick or an ISO, always choose site-based media. And if you have a hierarchy, collapse that one and then choose site-based media. And so provide a name for your recast 01.iso. Perfect. Next, select the boot image, this one, select the distribution point, and here you can actually now, as I mentioned before, you can select the CMD management point. So you generate an ISO, and I happen to have one. So if I go to one of my test machines again, I'm going to go with this one. And I'm going to connect it to a network that doesn't have access to my ConfigMgr server at all. So I'm going to plug it into one of my external network cards. And by the way, of course, you need to have a few network cards on servers, because just for good measures, so you can test different things. In my lab environment, I'm running, I guess, a bunch of different pfSense routers virtually, and all these have different network cards in them. So I can simulate different environments, different bandwidth, latency, package loss, you name it.
You're that guy
at TechNet.
You're that guy in TechNet who asked, how many network adapters can a VM have?
Yeah, exactly.
You were that guy.
I think it was there was a limit back in, was it Virtual PC that has like an 8 limit? It was like some stupid, anyhow.
There's always a limit, and there's always somebody asking, what is that limit and how do I go beyond it? There's always that one guy.
Yeah. So anyhow, I have a laptop here. It's configured for a laptop, and I have a VM connected to an external network card. So I'm going to boot this one up. And it would also help if I actually boot it on the right media. Come on. So this is my CMG ISO. So this is just a regular ConfigMgr boot image, boot process. But when I'm looking for policies, I'm not looking for policies locally. I'm actually over the internet asking the cloud management gateway and say, hey, do you have any policies for me? It approves this one. Here we go. So now I can pick my various want to deploy in 1909. I can do that. But the content is coming down from the Cloud Management Gateway rather than from, if I open up C and Trace and open up SMST's log file here. Search for CMD probably. Here we go. Using media token to communicate with vmmonster.cmd.vmmonster.com. So this is an external Cloud Management Gateway. So now from here on, when I start the deployment, assuming that I did distribute all my packages to it, which it will tell me if I didn't, it's going to download them from internet. Nothing needed locally. I just needed a media to start from, and I needed an IP address. So yeah, here we go. Deployment over internet. Config manager style. So yeah. With that, I think talked about transfer the content with peer-to-peer. I recommend doing that. Monitoring, we actually did enable the monitoring service in MDT to run in Azure, so you can actually follow your process there as well. And finally, Microsoft got status messages to work through Cloud Management Gateway, so you actually can get some status messages in there as well, which is, I think, nice. You always have local logging, but you cannot access the machines you cannot host anyway. I have seen some quite incredible community solutions. Michael wrote a bits upload thing to upload through bits. Niall Brady wrote something together regarding to Azure upload your log files to an Azure blob or Azure blobs as part of your imaging, so at least you can track what's going on. Something I wanted to scoot over also to before leaving over to Brian is a bit of a shameless plug, but I recently launched an online academy. We just ran through the first program, but these are 6-week programs that we run 2 hours every week. And we currently have programs for MDT Light Touch. We have for ConfigMgr, both from a deployment point of view and also for an operating point of view. So if you have a chance, check them out. And with that, Brian, what do you have for me?
Speaking of shilling, speaking of, that's a beautiful, beautiful segue. So I know it's been a while since I've seen you show a console, the ConfigMgr console that is. Back in the day when you were still a console jockey, what right-click tool did you find the most useful? What one did you kind of continue to go to, and why?
So I mean, over the years, I mean, right-click tools I've been using since, good Lord, SMS.
You don't have to date yourself if you don't want to. Like, nobody's forcing you to.
Back in days, my favorite feature, I think, my #1 feature is I right-click something in the console, and it shows me more stuff than was there previously, stuff that I think is missing in ConfigMgr. But for example, just being to be able to right-click a box and say, hey, just show me all the collections this machine happens to be in, fantastic. I've been using it to shortcuts to just remote into the logs folder, to the $C$share, or admin $share, or just get me a command prompt or recently PowerShell prompt, just to be able to do things that I mean, a lot of environments that I work with, they are production environments, and users they get sad when you take over their screen and do things. So sometimes you have to do it in the background, and that PowerShell is basically your only option in that sense, because the normal management tools in Windows are so limited and they are so slow. It's stupid, really. But PowerShell is your friend there. And of course, CMPivot and run script and that stuff. But it's nice to be able to get that real prompt to do things.
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it, right? Like, there's actually, I love the run scripts feature is great, but there's just times when you're like, I don't know, do I want to go write a script and approve it? It's like, I just need to run this command on this to figure some stuff out, to figure out what the next step is. And you know, just to have that, yeah, like you said, right at your fingertips is huge. So, all right, this is beautiful. Let's get into questions. So the plan now is basically the content per se is done. There's a whole list of questions in here, and we're basically going to stay here until, you know, Johan has to actually do real work that gets paid, or we run out of questions, whichever happens, or he just gets impatient or can't talk anymore, whichever happens first. I got a big next question. I'll ask one that's more high level, because I love watching this, and I was really looking forward to this session because we talked about some different ways to achieve these goals. And if you look at these, and based on your experience, right now, what I know a lot of orgs are facing is, okay, what if I need to bare image, you know, let's say I need to bare metal image at some random person's house, right? Like it's in there, it's sitting in there. There's some failure, and we just need to nuke and pave. And you know, we can you know, you can have the discussion of you should get to the root cause, but nuke and pave is a thing people do. And it's which of these tactics do you think makes the most sense for that sort of scenario where it's not a controlled network on their point, you just need to be able to make it happen?
Well, there are basically two scenarios, I think, that are the most valid ones from when having to reimage a box that is at someone's house, and that is to initiate the process from a USB stick and use either the network card on the device or a phone if you have that capability to boot. So I've used the phone as a network card, because at that point, it's just a regular deployment, and you will deploy and get the sequence from either Cloud Management Gateway if you're using ConfigMgr, or in Azure and Amazon if you're using MBT. And that's just a straight bare metal deployment. And as part of that process, we actually implemented routines. So when you do imaging to unknown computers, it actually registers that machine for autopilot as part of imaging, but it's not the client that does it. The client sends the request to a web service. We're running the REST PS PowerShell provider as a REST PS service, and it's that particular web service that does the registration. So that way I don't have to worry about credential on the client side. I have the server to do that instead. But it all comes down to booting up from a USB stick. I will say is the most common one. If you have the hardware capable of doing what I showed with the HP, if you guys have that pre-staged earlier, they can just do F11 and it will take care of the entire process. You can also, assuming the machine is actually a little bit okay, but you still need to reimage it. Of course, you can do scenarios like refresh and reset and things like that, or you can remotely apply a payload with a boot image and do that configuration, so they now can just reboot and press F11 to get the recovery going. I mean, if you think about it, Apple had this kind of scenarios for years where if you screw something up badly, you can, all right, start from BIOS and you can recover the scenario. If you have a phone that misbehaves, you can do the same thing there. But now you have the ability to do that same in the PC, as long as it has been pre-configured with that info.
Yeah, but I have a very good friend who is a true believer on the Apple product lines, and he reminds me of that consistently anytime I bring it up. So thank you.
Yeah, hats off. They were early, so yeah, I like it. Yeah,
absolutely. They also control the BIOS, right?
Yeah.
that's the beauty of control. And I'm sure as you've had this, and I've had this, and many people on this call have had this, right? You're like, you have a BIOS problem, and you go, you know, I've done it. I've gone to HP and said, hey, there's a problem in your BIOS, and like, well, we don't do BIOSes, we just buy them from other people. And it's like, yeah, you know, like it's a frustrating experience of like, well, they're trying to, you know, it's like, well, we're selling you the thing and it has a BIOS, but we don't actually write BIOSes. So we can't fix that. Or And it's always not a conversation I love having with them. But anyways.
I just hope that more vendors will follow HP's example and provide good framework and scripting to allow you to control this on your own.
Right.
So you don't have to, I mean, their services are great, but sometimes I want to be, no, I would like to use my stuff, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so with that, we're going to go into questions. There's a whole bunch queued up here. We'll start going. If you have other questions, go ahead again, go down to the Q&A section, ask them there, because we're going to kind of, like I said, we'll just go down in order and we'll just keep going until we can't go anymore. So Rainier Pullman asks, this goes back to early on, I think one of the intro slide. Do you have any tips on how to control the installation order, the specific order of applications when it's managed and deployed by Intune? And he says, besides using dependencies, which I always love these questions. They're like, hey, I know there's this kind of bad way to do it. I don't want to do it that way. I want to do it a better way.
The only way I've seen out there, I was working with a company over in Europe. They were doing a large autopilot project. You can use sequences to control that, because you can run a sequence as part of your autopilot experience. The trick there is that the ConfigMgr client is, as of now, that will change, but as of now, it's just a regular MSI package in Intune. And then you have all the other Win32 apps also in Intune, and they kind of fight who gets first. And if you're unlucky, it will actually take some time before that sequence kicks in and runs. So the trick there is usually to have just a very, very few apps that you're blocking the device until it gets, and then allow the sequence to do the rest. Of course, you could do some PowerShell scripting, but that really doesn't help much, because you just want to use the native application deployment mechanism. So outside of sequences and dependencies, I haven't seen any good way of controlling that. But
it's always nice to have it confirmed. Like, yeah, you're right. It's a problem. I wish there was a better way, but there's not.
I'm pretty sure there's someone out there who figured it out. They just haven't stumbled across it. But,
well, I mean, just like you said, rebuild it all in PowerShell, right? Just do it all yourself. Which is, I mean, like, I'm not saying it's the best way. It's just, it's a way. Next question. So I think this gets referred to the PSD, right? Like, is there you guys doing any kind of security review into some of those scripts to prevent them being used as an attack vector?
So we have, this is a hobby project that we've been working on the side for we got tricked into it, I should say.
Niehaus?
No, Niehaus set it up, but he didn't trick us. I think it was Andreas that tricked us to say, hey, a good developer would pull it off in like 5 weeks. Try 5 months.
Nothing like the bold-faced lie. Developer.
So this is just open source project, community project. Everything is posted online, every single bits of code line, but we haven't hired an external company to do like a code review of the stuff. But it's just pure PowerShell script, no compiled, nothing. And if you want to have someone to do a review of it, by all means, do a review of it. We're happy if you would share the result with us, but this is, again, something we do in our spare time, and the code is up there for anyone to review.
Or submit a PR.
We have plenty of feedback already. So
great.
Yeah.
Is there UDI support or the ability to pre-populate device name with PSD?
Oh, I'm happy that you asked. So we can actually, through this little, I can show you that post actually. Good friend Michael wrote about it, but so the REST PS is another community project, but it allows you to run a PowerShell script as a service on a server. And we use that to connect to the MDT database also. So during imaging, I can simply have pre-stage the device in the MDT database with name, with applications, with whatever that settings, sequences, whatever settings that computer has. So when I actually do start a deployment, it actually already knows what to get. I didn't show you that in the sequence before, but see, if I start this one up again, we do also prompt for computer name, and we also prompt for which Intune group would you like to add the machine to as part of the deployment. Because what we found is that static groups is actually a little bit more reliable than dynamic groups in Intune, because sometimes it only takes like 2 minutes for it to figure out there is a new device, and sometimes it takes 22 minutes to figure it out. So Autopilot will actually miss it. So what we added in on the server side is basically all the code that basically wait until the machine has imported, wait until it's been added to the group, wait until it actually has a policy applied to it, and everything. Basically, do all these controls server side, and just having the client wait until the server side figures out that, all right, you are actually ready to go. You're in this group. You have the right name. You have an assignment with an Autopilot profile. And then you are ready to go. So here you provide the computer name, and here you provide the Intune group where you want it to put the machine into. And this, through the web service, can also all be pre-staged in a regular SQL Express database, which we are using for a lot of other things during imaging. So that's what I like about PowerShell. It's so easy to invoke a web request or a REST request, REST API requests on the fly. I just don't like to run that code on the client. I prefer to have that code server-side, secured. Environment here, just to get the permission to do the things I need to do. I don't log in with username and password for all this stuff, but I've created application registration that has just enough permissions to do what I need to do in Intune. And I'm using a secret key to access this application. So in my scripts that I'm using, where did you go?
I love how much effort you're going to put into live streaming your secret key.
No. I prepared this demo
in a text
before.
file.
But yeah, so I have the application ID that I've created, and normally I would just put the app secret in the script itself. But in this case, for demo purposes, I'm actually putting it in a text file that I import when I run the script.
It's time for the thinking GIF.
Yeah, but all in all, this is just I don't. Okay, sure. If someone finds the script on the server, can access the folder where it's in, yeah, they can get access to an Azure object, which allow them to do changes in Azure or in Intune. But servers are not that hard to protect. It's a client-side scripting that is difficult to protect.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, bunch of other questions. I'm going to name and shame because I know I'm Ryan Hansard asks, does this support dial-up?
No.
I'm pretty sure that was I'm calling that one a joke. It's good. That would have been the April's Fool one. We should have said, hey, we're gonna do a demo and we're gonna do it on dial-up, and then you just put like the screeching noises and we're like, hey, we're gonna just sit here and wait a half hour.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, next question. Do you have any plans to compile some of the stuff into a Pluralsight course again? Although I think you probably kind of answered that at the end, which is like, no, I made my own Pluralsight.
Yeah, we launched our own platform, so I was not planning on doing anything more for Pluralsight. The old stuff is still up there if you want to review it, but it's about 4 or 5 years old by now. And what we found is that we wanted to do these live, so these are not pre-recorded. They happen when they happen because everything changes so quickly.
Yeah.
And it's nice to being able to say like, all right, did you see the news this morning about X, happening? So the answer is no.
Ryan was kind enough to offer up his AOL CD if we needed some dial-up minutes for the record.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you so much. We appreciate that.
It's such a kind offer. Imran asks, how do we get the PSD PowerShell into the task sequence?
You kind of don't. When you create new after you run the integration, when you create new sequences, Brian, whoops, I can't even spell Brian.
Right, most people can.
001 sequence. You have to pick one of the templates that we made for PSD.
Got it. Awesome.
And when you do, pick whatever, then you get a Brian sequence here with all the stuff that is needed. So this is the default template, and as you can see, it's super fast, super light. You can do this in 20 minutes if you have a good internet connection.
Cool. Same person asks, so regarding the PSD boot image, does it have to be on the device in your building, or can you have it saved on a network location? And I think that, I mean, when you talk about cloud imaging, you kind of talk about that.
Basically these, where did I put that one? I swear I had it here. So this is where it can be. So it can be on an internet Pixel server, it can be on a web server, it can be staged in the BIOS, it can be on a USB stick, it can be on many places.
Yeah.
So the answer is yes, it can be on a web server somewhere.
In the one I'll like, it's, you talked about HP, right? Like in the HP BIOS, you showed us, hey, there's a, get it from the internet, or local on it. How do you, like, the first option, if you were to download that so HP's feature to download I think they're talking about the boot image there, right? We're talking about.
I bet you can stage images too, but I'm assuming it was the boot image. Yeah.
Yeah, and is that, like, how do you control that URL? Is that?
Okay, so that was through the PowerShell thing I showed you before.
Got it. That's I'm just trying to put all the pieces together.
Yeah, and so they actually have, I didn't show you this link, but they actually put together a fairly decent guide on how to do this. I should probably be able to put that in the chat even.
Yeah. Okay. So, like, you would need to kind of pre-configure the BIOS.
Yeah. Someone needs to tell it. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Right. And make that's what I was trying to get the order of things, right? So it's like, okay, so you need to configure the BIOS to point it at, wherever the source is for the boot image, and then that F11 online cloud thing will work. Okay.
Exactly.
Got it.
Yeah.
And it gets to the question I asked first, right? Like, there's a lot of people that are just kind of like, they're, for lack of a better phrase, kind of caught with their pants down, right? Like, you didn't prepare. A lot of people didn't prepare for this, right? They didn't prepare for people being in their homes and not coming back for years, or in some cases, maybe ever, right? Some people may never go back into an office, and so I just trying to get all the pieces in my head.
Yeah. So this was the payload that I put down there.
Yeah.
On BIOS using PowerShell in this case.
Awesome. There was I had a bit of back and forth so Pixie and security, right? So, and I tried to get some clarity from this person about what their concern was, but they didn't have it, unfortunately, because the security. So their security department just says Pixie's insecure and you can't do it. And what is, I'm sure you've come across that. I'm sure you've come up against that. And so give us your best 30, 60 second pitch on why that's dumb, or how you can make it secure.
Well, over the past 30 years, I have my fair fights with networking folks in regards to security. And my only saying is in that area is, if that's what they are worried about, having a central Pixie server too that the clients can use, they have probably other problems. I don't see that as a big security risk, even though I understand what they're coming from. I worked with organizations, all sorts, hospital, banks, you name it, happily reviewing from a security point of view the Pixie implication and things like that. You have to understand what you're enabling. You're enabling in the feature of downloading a boot image. And for example, our Pixie provider, we can provide additional credentials even to get to download a boot image. And then once the boot image is downloaded, you can have certificates and additional authentication in that one. We had customers in their boot image actually providing extra authentication against Active Directory, so that you actually have to log in with an authenticated user to be able to continue. And when you start to do all those measurements, it's often okay. I mean, the other option is, okay, here's a USB stick. How is that USB stick more secure than image that you control on the server centrally? I just don't get it. So I usually win those fights, by the way. So if you need some ammunition, book me a call and I will be happy to talk to them.
All right, good stuff. Yeah, and I've had those similar arguments, right? In my last org, it's like, well, we literally put a PowerShell script out there on a network share to like create a boot image, and I know that there's just techs all throughout the organization just creating boot image after boot image. I'm sure there's just like thumb drives just littered throughout our organization. Everybody could pick up and like put in their machine and get booted right into our network, right? Like there's that aspect of it too. Like somebody could just grab this thing and boot a machine, and they're joined to our domain and have full access. It's a scary thought, but we'll move on. Okay, so is it possible to get a PC legacy domain joined using CMG Pixie builds? That's the question. I'm trying to parse that.
It's like the most common question when it comes to cloud imaging. ConfigMgr currently does not have any Azure offline join connector that like Intune has. I'm not sure they ever will create one, but currently you deploy into workgroup, you enroll possibly into Intune. As part of that process, you install the ConfigMgr agent, and it becomes managed as an Azure AD joined machine. Technically, though, there are solutions around it, just that Microsoft haven't published any or developed any for organizations to use as part of their platform. I've seen a lot of interesting. I saw Azure automation scenario, I think Ryan put together, possibly Adam, one of the two. But it all comes down to, at some point, even if you get all the offline domain join blob down to the client with all the group policy and other things on it, at some point that machine still needs to contact a domain controller to do that, final things you can actually log into it. So you need to get some sort of VPN up and running, or always on VPN, or something other than direct access, really, that is not, so it's tricky. It's doable. Microsoft doesn't have anything, but it can be done. It's easier not to do it.
Yeah, and I think that answers the next question, which is, how is the AD domain join going to work within a task sequence, right? Which is probably not, unless you do some
very creative work. Yeah.
You're going to like this one. You're going to pull a browser up and show another of your blog posts. Is there an approximate cost available for a single deployment over the CMG?
Oh, yes, almost.
Oh, yeah.
So I have a generic cost for stuff that I put together. Speaking of bad weeks, I just spent a week recovering from a server failure where I have all my sites, so that was also fun. Here, blind, but it's only on my eyes, so it's cool. But these are costs that I asked around from organizations using CMD of different sizes. Hey, can I please publish that without mentioning your name, obviously? And after reviewing that with their lawyers, they said, all right, we can do this. But the single deployment is a download about a 5 gig. So that's about $50 for deployment.
Yeah, I mean,
so that's the cost. You still have to pay for the service, and it's always going to be about $100 monthly, no matter what you do. And then it's going to be $50. But that's why we want to use peer-to-peer when we can, because when peer-to-peering, you only pay for the first download.
Yep.
All the other machines in the application will grab the stuff from the first client. And it's now it's only going to be the policies, the sequence itself, and some tiny things going on with the networks. You pay like a fraction of a cent to deploy piece number 2.
Yeah, in a lot of these scenarios too, I'm like, I'm not sure any of these would be my main imaging scenarios, right? But like, if you were doing tens of thousands of devices, right? Like, yeah, maybe I wouldn't want to do that, pull all that data over the cloud. Like that doesn't, like you said, then you would be intentional about setting up some peer-to-peer environment. You would intentionally set up some content. But like if you're doing some sort of, a kind of one-off, like, hey, I need to be able to pixie onto this weird location for these odd times. Like, why are we arguing about 50 cents? Like, like
if you go to manager and say, hey, we have 100 devices, 100 of our salespeople, they need to have their devices for image. It's going to be $50. Are you okay? That's going to be, yeah.
Right, exactly. Right. Or we could ship them all here for a week. It's like when you look at all the alternatives, I'm always just like, if you already have if you have the CMG in place, you've already gotten to that point, right? Like, I don't know why you would argue about like, well, we don't want to use it too much.
Just the shipping cost for one piece is going to be 50 bucks.
That's what exactly. So anyways, okay, we'll move on. So the question is, so I think with a CMG and imaging, that will still work from the software center, right? Like if I deploy a task sequence.
Oh yeah. Yep, absolutely. That was the first scenarios they actually enabled when CMG came back in 3 years ago. Anyway, you have been able to run sequences and applications and programs that way forever. It was just the bare metal imaging that was added as of late, the last 2 versions.
Yeah. Do you have a link for the REST PS module you mentioned?
Oh, I do.
It sounds like he was trying to do a quick search, and sometimes your Google searches are, if you Google search for REST API, like that's going to be a lot of hits.
I'm putting it out in the chat for you guys. Awesome. Here we go.
Beautiful.
And this is the guide to set up, and there is a link to the actual GitHub thing. Repository. Yeah,
I'm just laughing because I'm on the 4th question, and you nailed it. The 4th question is, hey, how do you do a domain join over the CMG? So you're right. That is a common question.
Yep.
And somebody's asking a slightly different version. Like, have you seen anybody even attempt that with a third-party VPN? Like he's mentioning Cisco AnyConnect specifically.
Yeah. Nias actually had a pretty good talk about it before he left Microsoft. So if you do a search for NeoHouse and VPN and Autopilot, he actually did a video recording about some of those scenarios that you can tap into. So that's certainly doable. The trick is to convince the security team of using machine-based certificates rather than user-based certificates. Yeah. Or you send them a VPN router, hardware device here, plug it in.
Yeah, I've had that discussion with a few people talking about like, how do we, I'm a tech, how do I image a device for somebody? I'm like, set up a quick point-to-point VPN if you need to. Like that, you can do that relatively cheaply.
You can buy devices for like $40 that will do it.
That's what I mean. Here. Like I get it. The times we're in, like one of those, and again, caught with your pants down. Like, what do you do? Like, go buy a cheap device that makes a point-to-point VPN, and because they're like, well, I don't. The exact phrase you used was, well, I connect via a VPN, but I don't have access to my corporate network, and I'm just like, you can't say that sentence as a whole. Right, that's what a VPN does. Like, you have access, you just need better access, right? You can solve that. Again, in the times that we're living in right now, you can solve that relatively cheaply, and you can, again, not ideal, but you could set up a little imaging station in your house, absolutely, without too much crazy workaround. Next question: has Lenovo made any noises regarding their own HP Sure Recovery work-alike? And I think the answer to that is yes. You talked about that briefly.
I saw someone, I did a session of this like last week, and somebody said, yeah, I've seen Lenovo having it, but I just haven't tried it myself. I guess that would be on my to-do list.
Yep. So it exists, just haven't played with it. How do I put a boot WIM in recovery partition and boot from it to re-image recover the OS?
That was basically the scripts and the library I showed you. That's how you put that down there.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's what you described there as an evolution of what you used to get the machine, and it would have a very visible split off partition that was the recovery partition, and the vendor would have their own golden image on there. Yeah. And a lot of us would come in and bare image and would like format that away, right?
It would just cause problems with servicing and BIOS to file conversions. It's like, oh, please get away.
Right. And so I think their question was like, well, how do I get my own good image in there? And I think the answer there is you don't. You use this. You're right. They've solved that in a different and arguably better way.
Oh, much better.
Yep. Again, another cost question about CMG answered.
So you have 3 minutes, Brian. Spend them well.
Yeah. For your tracking OS deployment milestones in ConfigMgr, where do you put the scripts in the task sequence, right? So you're talking about monitoring.
I usually just have, for tracking of milestones, I usually just use some keywords that I can follow up and track for. Not that one, this one. If I have any milestone in this little friend. I did not, but I will usually add in word somewhere, just a variable or just a name, and I track that name and ask for it.
All right.
Otherwise, I check for some of the things I know I will always have in my sequence. I can ask for those. So instead of parsing, recording every status message in my scripts, I pick like 5 ones that I want to track. So yeah.
Okay, probably one of the last questions here. Co-management, you got co-management and CMG configured, and you need to do in-place upgrades on 1,500 machines. What would you do?
I'm to this day the biggest fan of doing sequences for in-place upgrades. I usually use that, but I don't use one. I use 2. I use at least 1 for validation and pre-cache and testing, and then I do 1 that actually does the upgrade. That's how I split it out, and that's actually what will do after this. I'm helping a customer who is late of getting off 1809 that contacted me back in February. It's like, so here's the sitch. We have a lot of 1809 computers and kind of expires in May, so we need help. It's like, all right, let's do this.
Okay. All right. Last question, I think, is a good one to end on. So everything you've shown us, any tips on setting up a lab to test some of this stuff, right? Because you got some.
Well, I am happy that you asked.
Yes, exactly. That's why I thought it was a great question, because this is kind of a crazy setup. I mean, we saw a laptop with a phone connected.
So the biggest kits that I offer for lab automation is called the hydration kits, and this is the most current one that spins up a bunch of servers for a ConfigMgr environment. I have an older one for 2016 that has even more servers, even deployment service and a bunch of clients and a few other things. But this is a good starting point. There are several others out there. There was a Jumpstart kit you can download from Microsoft. There is an Azure Maven Lab. What the heck was this called? One of the Microsoft people developed their own recently and published, and there are a lot of resources out there to get a good lab. What I recommend, get the shiniest hardware that you can possibly find for a lab. This was a gift to my wife last Christmas. She had one and she noticed that I was jealous. So she bought a used HP workstation on eBay, $1,200. But it has a lot of CPUs, a lot of memories, and I just put in some extra memory and disk in it, and I can run about 100 VMs on this one. It doesn't even flinch.
Yeah, and if you're what I did, like if you're at an org, like look for a retired Citrix server, or
Exactly.
if you have anybody, if you have somebody running CAD, get the machine they're cycling out, right?
Yeah, this box is 4 years old. It's still like boom, boom, fast.
Right. I mean, you don't need the fastest processor, the fastest memory. You just need lots of it. Lots of it is better than any individual part being the fastest you can possibly get. That's how I always look at it. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Johan.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for organizing
this. An incredible amount of info. I'm hoping. I trust everybody had a lot of fun and learned a bunch of stuff. And we thank you again for your time.
All right. Have a good one. Thanks.
All right. Have a good one, everyone.